Good day, everybody. This is Watches This Week, episode 4, actually. And I think I have an alarm going off somewhere that I can probably disable. There we go. Sorry about that. Still getting the hang of the technical aspect of doing this. Thanks for joining me if you had a chance to. And this is a weekly live event I'm currently doing on Instagram where I talk a little bit about a topic pertaining to the watch industry that has drawn my attention over the prior week and share my thoughts on that topic from two perspectives, from the perspective of a collector and also from the perspective of a practicing economist. After the recording or the live broadcast is done, I do put the recording or provide the recording on Instagram. So that'll go up in the not too distant future. So this week's topic is in-house, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in-house, this term in-house is used by the industry to refer to essentially the guts of a watch and how those guts come about their existence in essence. So just to get some preliminaries out of the way here, what we're talking about is the movement or the caliber inside a watch case. Basically the mechanism that operates or provides the functions of timekeeping and all of the complications associated with it. So the first question is, what is in-house? And that's kind of a baseline definition of what it is, but in terms of details, what I just mentioned was sort of the conceptual notion of a movement, but when we say that a movement is in-house, there's no formal definition of what that means. It means different things to different people. And to provide an example of this, I'd like to talk a little bit about the what's called the Handmade One by Greubel Forsey, which is an independent brand doing some pretty amazing horology. So conceptually, an in-house movement is one that is manufactured within a brand or by a brand. Okay. And the Handmade One by Greubel Forsey, essentially the parts of this watch are made by hand by watchmakers in the house of the manufacturer of Greubel Forsey. But even in the case of this watch, which is, the one way to think about it is that it's a little bit more than in-house, right? It's in-house, but it's not done by machines in-house. It's done by hands, watchmaker hands in-house. Even for this watch that takes in-house to the next level, not all of it is actually made by Greubel Forsey. 95% of the parts are made by Greubel Forsey. This is a picture of the Handmade One, a pretty amazing timepiece. I think the reports I saw said that it might sell for something like $500,000. Those reports are a little dated, so I apologize if if that information is not accurate. But if we look at this watch, there's just pretty amazing three-dimensional aspect to it. Sort of a small seconds feature. The balance is up front, and in view of the owner or the wearer, and it's an amazing piece of work. But as I mentioned, 5% of the parts were sourced external to Greubel Forsey. The sapphire, the mainspring, and the jewels. Now, if we calculated the portion of the watch which was not Greubel Forsey by value, how the cost of actually creating that part. We might get closer to 98, 99%. That's conjecture on my part, but still, the point is that even an in-house movement is not 100% manufactured within a or by a brand, and there's reasons for that, which we're going to talk about in a second. Now, it's a lot easier to define what is not an in-house movement. Okay, and it's pretty commonly accepted that if a brand sources a movement from a specialist manufacturer like Etta or Sellita or Soprod, or even this week a company named Horage is offering a sort of a base caliber to micro brands. Okay, if you basically just source that movement and then kind of create the case and the hands and the design of the watch itself, then that watch clearly does not have an in-house movement. Although even brands that source these movements will so-called adjust or try to achieve something like a chronometer rating with those watches with those movements when they're sourced. All right, so let's start with the good of a watch built around an in-house movement. Okay, the good is that it truly is a different species. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, if we think about watches as sort of being arrayed in this biological sense, where you have, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, right? When you have a watch made, let's say, by an independent brand, or even by, a larger brand like Tudor with an in-house movement, that product is highly differentiated from other watches on offer, to the point where you'd say it is truly unique, truly a different species. And that's good, right, if you want something unique or different, right? Sometimes watch industry observers will refer to a brand's DNA. Okay, it is most true that a brand has unique DNA when it is employing an in-house movement. Okay, because it's just designed that movement from the ground up and built it, with its own tools, its own manufacturing strategies, its own watchmakers, so on and so forth. Okay, and for the management of the brand, that introduces a whole different level of complexity for running that company, because you actually have a significant manufacturing enterprise and engineering enterprise that's part of the company. Okay. Now, the reason why this might matter is, you might ask, is it worth it to spend more for a brand that only differs in phenotype, right? What's phenotype? It's sort of the external features of a biological organism, right? So, for example, I have a picture here of a glycine combat sub, which uses an Etta 2824 movement. Okay, and you can currently buy this watch, labeled Swiss made, for around $329 US. All right. Diver, with a rotating bezel, date complication, that sort of thing. Labeled Swiss made, and I think this one has 20 atmospheres of water resistance. Okay. Now, for $2,650, at least on Joma Shop this morning, you could get a Breitling. I think this is a Super Ocean. It is chronometer rated, but with a bezel, date complication, more water resistance. I want to say 100 atmospheres. All right, so functionally there is a difference there in terms of diving performance. But at the end of the day, this is also built upon the Etta 2824. So, the genotype of these two is basically the same. The actual DNA, right, that determines function is the same across these two. It's only the appearance, the phenotype, that is different. And that does offer some different function and potentially quality. But you have to ask yourself, is it really an 8x difference in quality? I mean, this is a very important question to take seriously, because for the same price as this Breitling on JomoShop, and so that's the gray market price. I mean, you pay even more, probably from an AD, but for the same price and on Joma, for this Breitling, you could get, the glycine. You could get 8 of those glycine watches, and maybe you dive with it and a seal fails because you went too deep. Okay, well, I've got 7 more, right? And you wouldn't even need to service them. Well, you might, because the lubricants might dry out over time, but I mean, you could save on servicing costs, and that sort of thing. So is it really worth 8 times the quality difference? And that's where in-house begins to matter, because if the genotype is different, if the actual engineering of the movement is different across brands, it becomes a little more, reasonable to accept a higher price. The other aspect to in-house movements, which I think are worth considering, is that sort of the implicit level of support offered to the industry by buying that type of timekeeper. Okay, so if you think about it, there are watchmakers working in all different kinds of enterprises, right? If you work for ETA, let's say, chances are you're working in some sort of assembly line process where all you do is, let's say, attach a particular bridge to a movement, and you do that over and over again. But if you are working at a enterprise with in-house manufacturing, it's much more likely that you are going to experience and build skills in multiple aspects of movement manufacturing and design. Okay, and having particular watchmakers building those skills is really going to sort of enhance the potential for future innovation, new brands, and that sort of thing. Okay, so one sort of positive side effect of in-house movements and buying in-house movements is that you're kind of supporting this development of deeper skills among watchmakers. And, it's my personal belief that that's extremely important for the long-term viability of the industry. All right, so now let's talk, though, a little bit about the bad. The bad probably boils down to one thing. It is very expensive. Generally speaking, it's very hard to find a in-house movement priced below, let's say, $2,000 US. The reasons for that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Now, a lot of brands or companies are trying to move down that cost curve with in-house movements, and there are efforts by small groups of brands, let's say 3 brands, to get together and manufacture an in-house movement, which they can call in-house because only those 3 share the design. But by sharing it, they kind of spread those costs across a wider set of sales. Okay, so in-house is counter to sort of prevailing trends when it comes to industrial production. Okay, the assembly line is, once you start moving away from assembly line production, you're sort of reverting to 19th century or earlier manufacturing techniques, right? And that sort of undoes all of the benefits from specialization and efficiency associated with assembly lines, right? So if your watchmakers are doing multiple skills in your company, or multiple tasks, right? There's a potential that they become sort of a jack of all trades, but a master of none, and it's a little bit slower to make the watches, and slower is generally more expensive. Okay. In addition, these movements are generally going to be produced in small batches, and so you're facing what's called diseconomies of scale, right? When you produce at scale, you can, for example, spread out the cost of maintaining a facility, a factory, the taxes you have to pay on that and that sort of thing. You can spread those fixed costs across more timepieces, and so the cost per unit goes down. All right, and so that's the main sort of downside to the existence of in-house movements, which is that they run counter to efficiency and lower costs. Okay, now what's the ugly? All right, and unfortunately, I don't know that this is necessarily the best term to describe this topic, but it is something people need to be aware of. And the question would be, does an in-house caliber have a future? And, by future, I might not even be talking about 10, 15, 20 years from now. I might even be talking about, over the next 5 years, when that movement, that watch requires servicing. All right, let me give you an example of what I mean by this. Okay, this is a really fascinating development in an in-house caliber. I'm not going to name names when it comes to this necessarily, but a very high-skilled watchmaker I've actually met in person in passing. He's shared this incredible innovation involving a spherical jewel, okay, and a bridge above it, some extended screws, and all of this is connected to the hairspring of the movement. And the watchmaker is referring to this as a multi-dimensional hairspring adjuster. I mean, this is awesome because you can fine-tune the timing of the watch and the performance of the watch, much more easily with something like this, potentially. But the question is, if you bring this watch to some random watchmaker for servicing and they open it up, are they going to know what to do with this bridge, right? And is that going to become more and more of an issue as time progresses if, the person that manufactured this watch is no longer servicing them or available to explain how it works, right? And I'm not picking on any particular innovation, but the truth of the matter is that if you produce something very unique, then you might be the only one who is able to service it. And what if your company goes out of existence? Will the watch, will people still be able to service this watch? And I've just heard, grumblings about concerns when it comes to this topic. Maybe with respect to FP Journe, I don't know why, but people are talking about, what's the roadmap for that brand over time, if there's a retirement or a major change to the people associated with that brand. Again, I'm not trying to pick on anyone in particular. I myself have a Tudor watch with an in-house movement, and it has a silicon escapement, I believe, and maybe balance. I wonder, hey, if Tudor doesn't make these parts anymore, how is it going to be serviced? Okay, so this is a very important question to ask, and it actually feeds back into the bad part of in-house movements, which is that servicing costs may be extremely high because the watchmaking industry as a whole, independent watchmakers simply may not be able to service in-house movements, and so essentially you're facing a monopoly problem when it comes to servicing your watch, and so that feeds back into how expensive it is to buy an in-house movement. All right, so just to wrap up, what I'm going to say is that there's no one answer to the in-house question. I don't accept that the notion that in-house is hype only. I understand where that notion comes from, but I do think we need to acknowledge the fact that by buying in a watch with an in-house movement, you are supporting skill development and innovation in the watch industry, and I think that's important. But I'll also acknowledge that it's not necessarily for everyone. If you're okay with your watch having a movement which is similar to many other brands out there, and the phenotype differences, the sort of case differences and design differences are important enough for you, then it might make perfect sense to go ahead and buy a high-priced watch with a fairly standard movement. So there's no one-size-fits-all answer to this question, but I just wanted to offer a few thoughts about it from my own perspective. Thanks for sharing this video if you have a chance to, and commenting on it on Instagram. I appreciate your listening in, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.